You walked into the dealership for a bike. What you signed up for was something else entirely. Years of debt, fees you never saw coming. Riders are waking up, and what they've found will make you think twice. Watch to the end, because what's happening next changes everything. What's happening? For decades, Harley-Davidson stood as a symbol of working-class freedom. A Harley wasn't just a motorcycle, it was an identity, a lifestyle wrapped in leather, noise, and rebellion. Riders didn't simply buy bikes, they bought into a brotherhood. But somewhere along the way, something fundamental changed. Starting in the early 2010s, dealerships quietly rewrote the rules of engagement. They turned what was once a fair exchange into a carefully constructed illusion, one that redefined what riders believed was normal. It started small. Subtle price increases were rolled out under the radar, masked by updated trim levels or new paint options. Nobody blinked when a bike went up by a few $100s. But behind the scenes, Harley dealerships were running a campaign, not just to raise prices, but to reshape what value meant altogether. Words like legendary craftsmanship, heritage, and premium performance began saturating marketing materials. The pitch shifted from performance to prestige, from freedom to exclusivity. This wasn't an accident, it was manipulation cloaked in nostalgia. Then came the scarcity play. During the pandemic, when global supply chains buckled, Harley dealers saw an opportunity. Inventory dropped, but demand remained. Dealerships warned customers that prices were about to skyrocket and they'd better buy now before it's too late. Some buyers were even told the bike they wanted might not be available for another year if they didn't act immediately. That urgency, manufactured or not, worked. Riders shelled out thousands more, convinced they were outmaneuvering a crisis, when in truth they were playing right into it. As the dust settled, a harsh reality emerged. The Harley experience had been rebranded, not rebuilt. Dealers weren't just selling bikes, they were selling fear, ego, and status. Prices that once would have sparked outrage were now met with shrugged shoulders. What used to feel like exploitation had been reframed as loyalty. Riders believed they were paying more for something sacred. In reality, they were paying more because they were told to. But the illusion wasn't limited to sticker prices. It extended deep into how Harley-Davidson sold the dream, one payment at a time. Like what you're hearing, hit like and drop a comment. Let us know how your dealership treated you. Trapped by Chrome. As bike prices crept upward, fewer people could afford to pay out of pocket. Dealerships saw the writing on the wall. Instead of lowering costs or offering realistic financing, they introduced something far more seductive: long-term loans dressed up as freedom. These weren't just payment plans, they were psychological traps designed to keep riders chasing a lifestyle while slowly drowning in debt. The setup was disarmingly simple. Stretch the payments across 5, 6, or even 7 years. Keep the monthly bill low enough to look manageable, just a few $100s a month. Frame it as the cost of living the dream. The fine print: a $22,000 motorcycle could end up costing closer to $40,000 when the term ended. That wasn't a feature, it was the plan. Interest rates climbed well above 10% for many buyers, and for younger riders or those with shaky credit, the numbers could be even worse. These were the very people Harley used to champion: blue-collar workers, first-timers, and weekend thrill-seekers. Now they were being leveraged. Dealership finance departments framed it all as normal, talking more about horsepower than interest rates, more about chrome than credit scores. Some dealers added another layer of deception: the refinancing promise. You can always refinance later when your credit improves, they'd say. The bike's value will go up. But that never happened. Bikes depreciated faster than riders could keep up. Instead of building equity, buyers were underwater within months, locked into years of high-interest payments on machines worth far less than they owed. And just when riders thought they understood the cost, they were hit with the next betrayal, buried not in emotion, but in paperwork. Want gear that doesn't lie to you? Everything we use, helmets, gloves, cameras, and more, is linked in the description. No scams, no fees, just rider-approved gear that actually delivers. The knife twist. Walking into a Harley dealership was supposed to be an experience, a ritual. The roar of the engines, the polished tanks, the smell of rubber and oil. It all screamed authenticity. But hidden behind that chrome and leather theater was a quieter game, the fee trap. These weren't just inflated prices, these were extra costs slipped into the contract when buyers were too hyped, too distracted, or too trusting to notice. The manufacturer suggested retail price was never the end of the story. A $2,000 destination fee was often added just to cover transportation. Dealer prep fees, $800 or more for a basic inspection and battery charge. Then came the infamous market adjustment fee, a few $1,000s thrown in simply because the bike was hot. There was no legal requirement, no added service, just a price hike, justified by demand. Finance managers were trained in the art of confusion. They'd rush through paperwork, keep riders focused on the monthly payment, not the total cost. A quick signature here, an initial there, and boom! What should have been a $15,000 bike now cost over $21,000. Most didn't realize the trap until they got home. And then there was the phantom bike trick. Dealerships would claim a popular model was already sold or hidden in the back. They'd stage sold tags, hint at limited availability, or suggest a long wait list. The goal, manufacture urgency. Push the buyer to close the deal that day before someone else did. And it worked. Every tactic was designed to overload the buyer's senses and emotions until the price became an afterthought. However, as the ink dried and the bills came due, something shifted. Quietly, powerfully. Riders just walked away, and Harley felt it. At first, there were no marches, no viral exposés, no boycotts, just silence. But in that silence, something far more powerful was building: resistance. One by one, riders started doing the math. The online posts grew louder. Reddit threads, Facebook groups, motorcycle forums, stories began to align. Buyers realized they weren't alone. They had all been sold the same illusion, wrapped in the same chrome. The backlash wasn't explosive, it was calculated. Instead of marching into showrooms, riders simply stopped walking in at all. Dealership foot traffic slowed. Inventory that once disappeared in weeks began collecting dust. Dealerships responded with discounts, incentives, bundled offers, but it was too late. The trust was broken. Riders began searching for used bikes, reaching out through rider-to-rider communities, avoiding the dealership altogether. They didn't need Harley to ride. And they definitely didn't need to be lied to. The silence spoke louder than any protest ever could. The brand that once symbolized independence had become a warning. But while the showrooms emptied, pressure started boiling behind the counter and inside the system itself. The Desperation discount. When the silence from riders turned into a nosedive in sales, Harley-Davidson dealerships panicked. For years, they had inflated prices, padded contracts with hidden fees, and leaned hard on emotional manipulation. Now the backlash was real, and their solution was simple: slash prices. The very same dealerships that once insisted their prices were justified by heritage and legendary craftsmanship suddenly began offering discounts that made those claims look hollow. They rolled out massive markdowns. Thousands of dollars were shaved off models that were overpriced for years. Once coveted baggers and touring bikes now came with deep cuts and bundled service packages. It was a fire sale disguised as generosity. But for many riders, the timing was suspect. These weren't deals, they were confessions. A quiet admission that prices were bloated to begin with. The trust that had been broken wasn't coming back with a coupon. Even worse, the price drops alienated recent buyers who had just overpaid. Riders who were locked into long-term loans at inflated rates were now watching newer customers walk away with the same bike for $5,000 less. It sparked a fresh wave of resentment. The brand that had once built loyalty through shared identity was now dividing its base with inconsistent pricing and desperate incentives. Dealerships hoped to stop the bleeding with markdowns, but they underestimated the damage. Riders didn't just feel cheated, they felt betrayed. No discount could undo that. As prices dropped, so did respect. The more dealers tried to buy back goodwill, the more it exposed how manipulated the pricing had been all along. The public was no longer confused. They were angry and watching closely. But riders weren't the only ones waking up. Behind the sales desk, something else was breaking down. Something internal. Revolt Within. Inside the dealerships, the pressure was boiling. Sales staff, many of whom once believed in the Harley dream, were now being pushed to meet impossible targets. Management expected them to sell loyalty in a climate of distrust, to move overpriced inventory to buyers who had already seen through the facade. The result? Burnout, breakdowns, and something worse, moral rebellion. Some employees had been part of the illusion for years. They'd convinced themselves that high prices were justified, that financing was fair, that riders were lucky to be part of something bigger. But after wave of customer outrage, something cracked. One salesperson in Arizona walked out mid-shift, dropping his badge on the floor and telling a customer, "You deserve better than this." It wasn't just drama, it was defiance. Others quietly refused to push bad loans. A few even started warning customers, subtly, about hidden fees buried in the paperwork. Word began spreading that not all dealership staff were loyal to the script. For some, the weight of selling lies was too much. They had come into the job because they loved bikes. Now they felt like pawns in a system built on deception. The tension was contagious. Floor managers cracked under the strain. Some tried to rally their teams with promises of bonuses or commissions. But in a world where loyalty was collapsing, money wasn't enough. What good was a commission if you couldn't look a rider in the eye? And if salespeople were the first to crack, the real fight was only just beginning. In the service bays where mechanics decided they'd had enough. Harley mechanics just had enough. While showroom staff fought a moral battle, the mechanics waged a different war, one rooted in exploitation. These were the hands that kept the dream alive. They built, tuned, and repaired the machines that defined Harley culture. And yet many earned barely above minimum wage, worked without proper benefits, and were pushed to meet unrealistic turnaround quotas with little recognition. When sales dried up, service departments became the lifeline. Dealerships leaned hard on mechanics to bring in revenue. More hours, more upsells, more pressure, but no raises, no gratitude. It was business as usual until it wasn't. In the summer of 2024, a service tech in Milwaukee uploaded a video that changed everything. He filmed himself being reprimanded for refusing to charge a customer for a part that wasn't actually replaced. The clip went viral. Within days, other mechanics across the country began sharing their stories. Underpaid, overworked, and exploited, especially during a time when their labor was keeping the lights on. The spark turned into a flame. In Denver, staff organized the first unofficial meeting to discuss unionizing. Then Chicago, then Phoenix. Within weeks, online groups formed. Mechanics, service advisors, even part staff began comparing pay scales, working conditions, and management tactics. The disparities were staggering. Workers in the same company were treated with wildly different levels of dignity depending on the state or dealership owner. And when lawmakers finally stepped in, it wasn't just a reckoning, it was a trial. Harley dealers are finally on trial. For years, Harley-Davidson dealerships operated with near impunity. Hidden fees, predatory loans, false scarcity, manipulative sales tactics. Riders complained, but nobody listened. That changed in 2024. As stories flooded social media and whistleblowers came forward, regulators took notice. And then they acted. State attorneys general in California, New York, and Texas opened investigations. They subpoenaed internal communications, interviewed former employees, and poured through thousands of customer complaints. What they found confirmed what riders had been saying for years, a pattern of deception. The lawsuits came next. Dealership groups were hit with class action suits alleging price inflation, loan abuse, and deliberate misrepresentation. Some suits came from buyers trapped in loans. Others were filed by laid-off employees who claimed retaliation for speaking up. It wasn't just a legal crisis, it was a public spectacle. In Washington, D.C., congressional hearings were called. Executives from major dealership chains were grilled under oath. Some tried to spin the story as a misunderstanding. Others blamed economic volatility. But the narrative had already shifted. Harley dealers were no longer small business heroes. They were the face of corporate predation. But legal reform wasn't the end. In fact, it was just the beginning of a much larger shift, a cultural reset led by the very people who were once deceived. One bike at a time, they broke the system. As dealership trust collapsed, riders didn't just complain, they adapted. Instead of marching into showrooms, they turned to each other. Used bike sales, once a niche corner of the motorcycle world, exploded into a full-blown revolution. It wasn't just about cost savings anymore, it was a declaration of independence. Every bike bought peer-to-peer was one less sale for the dealers who had exploited them for years. Online forums became digital marketplaces. Riders posted listings, shared photos, and provided brutally honest reviews. Craigslist, Facebook Marketplace, and newer platforms like Rumble Cycle and MotoSwap became essential tools for the fed-up rider. Not only could buyers sidestep the fees and markups, they could connect directly with other riders who knew the value of their machines and weren't trying to hide it. Even financing was replaced. Riders started saving up using local credit unions or bartering tools and labor to seal the deal. Ownership became more than just a title. It became a community pact. No more tricks, no more fine print, just honesty and handshakes. And what made it all possible? A new kind of power, one that lived in every rider's pocket and spoke in numbers instead of promises. The algorithm strikes back. Dealerships had long relied on confusion. Buried fees, fluctuating prices, and slick-talking finance managers kept buyers in the dark. But that advantage crumbled when riders embraced technology. Apps and online tools pulled back the curtain, and the results were devastating for the old guard. Platforms like CycleCheck, VinScope, and Dealer Expose allowed riders to scan bike listings, compare dealership pricing across state lines, flag hidden charges, and even calculate total loan costs in real time. One tap and the truth spilled out. What used to take hours of haggling or blind trust now took 10 seconds and a smartphone. It wasn't just information, it was armor. Some apps crowdsourced dealership behavior. Riders submitted reviews not just of the bike, but of the sales process. Did the manager try to sneak in a destination fee? Was the financing predatory? Did the price mysteriously jump during the paperwork phase? It all went into a growing public database that allowed shoppers to make decisions backed by data and community insight. Dealers tried to fight back. Some rewrote listings to confuse the algorithms. Others masked fees with vague language, but the riders had learned too much. They knew how to read between the lines. They shared screenshots, broke down contracts, and taught each other how to push back. The power dynamic flipped. But this wasn't just about tools, it was about a cultural rebirth. One rooted in simplicity, authenticity, and a little grease under the fingernails. DIY wrenches, not dealership lies. As more riders turned away from dealerships, they didn't just change how they bought bikes, they changed what kind of bikes they wanted. The flashy showroom cruisers, decked out with overhyped tech and inflated prices, lost their shine. In their place, a new appreciation emerged for something older, rawer, and more personal. Vintage machines and the do-it-yourself spirit that once defined motorcycling. Rallies popped up not to unveil new models, but to celebrate old ones. In towns like Asheville, Dayton, and Flagstaff, vintage-only meetups drew crowds of riders who proudly displayed their well-worn bikes, each with a story, each with its own scars. The loudest cheer wasn't for the newest model, but for the cleanest rebuild or the most creative customization. Community garages followed. Shared workspaces sprang up in industrial lots, backyards, and even converted barns. Riders pooled tools, shared manuals, and taught each other how to change oil, replace belts, and tune carbs. Mechanics became mentors. Riding became crafting. Every bolt turned by hand was another act of rebellion against dealership dependence. This wasn't a brand war. It was a culture shift. And for the first time in years, it felt like the community was setting the terms, not the corporations. But culture alone couldn't hold the line. Riders needed accountability. They needed protection. And that meant building something even more powerful than apps or rallies, a network of watchdogs. The Justice. What began as buyer outrage soon evolved into structured resistance. Riders, sick of getting burned, built systems to track, expose, and punish dealerships that crossed the line. Accountability went grassroots, and it worked. The first wave came in the form of digital blacklists. Community forums started maintaining running tallies of the worst offenders. These weren't vague rants, they were detailed breakdowns of interactions, complete with images of contracts, fee breakdowns, and names. One dealership in Southern California lost half its monthly sales after being flagged repeatedly for stacking market adjustment fees without disclosure. Word spread fast, and that was the point. Soon riders took it further. Groups like Dealer Guard and Moto Justice formed. Their missions: investigate shady dealership behavior, verify customer claims, and publish monthly reports ranking transparency. They operated with military precision, crowd-funded by the very community they defended. Think Yelp, but with receipts and retaliation. Public call-outs became common. Videos surfaced of buyers confronting dealerships. Live streams showed riders walking away from deals mid-signature, narrating every manipulation attempt for thousands of viewers. Hashtags like #SureRideFair and #SureDealerExposed trended nationally, pressuring companies to change or suffer the consequences. And as that power solidified, the final question loomed. Could Harley, or any manufacturer, survive in a world where riders had taken back control? Rivals react. Harley's pain became their profit. As Harley-Davidson fought to contain the firestorm of dealership backlash, its rivals watched closely and then pounced. Indian Motorcycle, Royal Enfield, and a wave of nimble upstarts saw an opening they could not ignore. Where Harley stumbled with bloated pricing, hidden fees, and broken trust, these competitors moved with clarity, transparency, and intention. Indian, always positioned as Harley's most direct challenger, began targeting disillusioned Harley owners with precision. They launched buyback programs offering generous trade-in values for used Harleys and bundling transparent financing deals. Riders who felt betrayed didn't just leave Harley behind, they felt welcomed somewhere else. And Indian made sure to drive that wedge deeper with every ad that promised no hidden fees, no surprises, just the ride. Royal Enfield took a different route. Their focus on affordability, classic styling, and mechanical simplicity spoke directly to the grassroots movement brewing within the rider community. While Harley dealerships hawked $30,000 touring bikes with 12-year loans, Enfield offered sub-$7,000 models that didn't require a second mortgage. For younger or first-time riders, the choice became clear. As Harley floundered in damage control, its rivals surged forward, reshaping the market. But what Harley didn't realize was that it wasn't just a brand war anymore. It was a political one. The Lobbyist War. As consumer fury boiled over and legislation loomed, Harley and its dealership associations responded with a familiar tool: lobbying muscle. The same machinery that had long shielded auto giants from aggressive regulation now revved into high gear to protect Harley's crumbling empire. On one side stood lobbyists representing motorcycle dealers, pleading with lawmakers to ease up on proposed consumer protection laws. They painted pictures of rural communities losing jobs, family-run dealerships collapsing under red tape, and an industry unable to adapt quickly enough to survive. Let us self-regulate, they argued. We know our riders best. On the other side, an emboldened coalition of consumer rights groups, riders, and newly energized advocacy networks demanded accountability. They flooded state houses with testimony, delivered petitions, and campaigned online with viral force. Hashtags like #SureFixTheRide and Dealer Justice became rallying cries as citizens demanded fair lending practices, transparent pricing, and consequences for years of abuse. States like California and New York led the charge, drafting legislation that banned hidden fees, capped interest rates on motorcycle loans, and required upfront cost disclosures. Meanwhile, Harley's lobbyists scrambled to stall the bills, pouring tens of millions of dollars into campaign donations, media buys, and quiet backroom deals. That political pressure soon rippled through the factory gates, where another storm was gathering: the factory shake. While the spotlight stayed on dealerships, a quieter, more dangerous rebellion brewed behind Harley's factory walls. In places like York, Pennsylvania, and Menominee Falls, Wisconsin, the workers who built the iconic bikes began to feel the fallout in ways no financial report could capture. Production slowed, orders dipped, shifts were cut without warning, overtime evaporated. Morale, once fueled by pride and craftsmanship, began to erode. Workers whispered in break rooms and vented in union meetings. If dealerships had exploited riders, many now asked, had the company done the same to its own people? The whispers became chants. Mechanic unions that had long battled for better safety standards and consistent scheduling now found common cause with sales staff and floor workers. Walkouts erupted. Social media posts from factory employees went viral. Images of empty production lines, abandoned workstations, and protest signs reading, "You broke the trust, now we break the silence." Harley's management issued statements promising internal reviews and renewed commitments to transparency. But inside the plants, few believed it. The culture of silence was over. Workers wanted guarantees: better pay, healthcare stability, and job security that didn't vanish with each quarterly dip in stock price. But even as workers stood tall, the people Harley feared most weren't in leather vests or union halls. They were in suits, watching from high-rise boardrooms. If this shocked you, subscribe now. We're exposing every layer of the industry they hoped you'd never question. The shareholder panic. Harley isn't just losing riders, it's losing believers. The final blow didn't come from the factories or the forums, it came from Wall Street. For decades, Harley-Davidson had been treated as an untouchable icon, its stock a slow but steady bet on American brand loyalty. But when analysts started downgrading Harley's future, not just for the next quarter but the next decade, investors took notice. Share prices began slipping in early 2024. At first, the drop seemed tied to market trends, but by spring the slide had turned into a plunge. Credit agencies downgraded Harley's debt. Institutional investors started quietly exiting. The signals were everywhere. Harley-Davidson was no longer considered a growth brand, it was seen as a liability. Earnings calls became defensive. Executives scrambled to frame the backlash as temporary headwinds and promised new strategies: stripped-down models, online sales, better pricing structures. But the market was done listening. What they saw was a company over-leveraged on nostalgia, outpaced by rivals, and bleeding credibility from every corner. By summer, the panic spread. Hedge funds shorted the stock. Retirement accounts divested. The once reliable dividend shrank. For the first time in Harley's modern history, it wasn't the bikes under threat. It was the belief in the company itself. And that belief, once shaken, rarely returns. Subscribe now. Join the Rider Rebellion, expose the truth, and share your story. Your voice fuels real change. Let's ride.